Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Walter's Wanderings Travel Podcast. This is episode number 38. I've already made it up to 38, which is really amazing, and I appreciate the guests who have been on all the times that they've been on. I want to talk to you about a few things before we bring on our guest this morning. First thing I want to talk about is you have 2 days left. That's 2 days left to take advantage of my special offer with NCL, Norwegian Cruise Lines. With Norwegian Cruise Lines, you get to choose what you want to do with freestyle cruising. But if you book a cruise with me today or tomorrow, pay a small deposit, you will get extra onboard credit. We're talking $100 extra onboard credit for an interior or ocean view cabin, $200 extra onboard credit for a balcony or better cabin. So if you want a balcony a suite or the Haven, for any cruise that Norwegian Cruise Lines runs, we'll get that for you. It's a special offer I have in conjunction with Norwegian Cruise Lines. As well, we do have a special offer with Air. Buy one, get one free. Are you kidding me? For example, I'm going on a cruise August of 2022 to Rome. The round trip Rome is classic Greece and Italy, and it's going to be $899 per person with airfare. But if you do the BOGO, you only have to pay for one person for every two. So my family of 5, I saved 2 airfares. So I saved $1,800. That is not chump change, folks. That basically is going to pay for all the shore excursions. So listen, get in touch to start wandering. 845-558-1225 or Scott at Walter's Wanderings with an A, travel.com. So that takes care of that. We'll also let you know that we do have other things going on, and summer availability is much harder to get this time than it was 2 years ago, pre-COVID, because hotels are at 50% capacity in most places, and therefore supply and demand and all that goes with it. So you have to get those summer plans early. All right, now it's time for me to bring in my guest, colleague of mine, bon vivant, and well, he's got a neat little background there with a ship kind of a theme in the back. Ken Edmonds is with us, and today we're going to talk about accessibility travel for those who are differently abled. It's a really big thing now, or it's a bigger thing, and the thing I think everyone has to understand is that not everywhere in the world are people with disabilities and such treated with the same respect as they are here with the Americans with Disabilities Act. I think that's the first thing we ought to go through. So, Ken, talk about traveling in foreign countries and the differences that there might be from traveling here domestically.
Well, I will say this, Scott. It's really interesting because there are areas of the world that are pretty good. Most of the EU, there's a lot of focus on disability travel. I just did an interview on my channel with a lady from Romania that does accessible tours. And I guess that's part of what I'm seeing is there's a lot more accessible tours available because this particular company in Romania, that's their focus is accessible tours. I did another interview yesterday. It's not published yet, but with a gentleman from Madeira, the islands of Portuguese islands off the coast, basically of Africa, and he runs disability tours, and so there's starting to be more of that. But there are places that it becomes a challenge. Some of the things that I find actually, let me back up. I'll say this to start with: the Baltic capital area is one of those places that can be more challenging. St. Petersburg has a reputation for being significantly less than friendly to people that travel with disabilities. Most of the museums and things, if there's stairs, and they don't really work to help you. Getting people to assist you is much more challenging. Some of the other Baltic capitals have the challenge of cobblestones and steep hills. And my wife is not a full-time wheelchair user, but usually if we would be out touring, she's going to be in her wheelchair, and cobblestones and steep hills are not good companions. Now, I will say this. You mentioned it was really interesting. I did an interview with a lady that is a full-time wheelchair user. She's paraplegic. And we were talking about the fact that, in the U.S. things you expect them to be fairly accessible. But there are still notable exceptions. Taxis in the U.S. Are not necessarily friendly. If you go down in the French Quarter, the sidewalks slope like this. And so when you're pushing a wheelchair, you're pushing, a little bit uphill. And then some of them are cobblestones. And if there's cobblestone missing, it just all becomes very less than friendly.
No, I certainly understand that.
I think that you'll find a lot of places are pretty good. I just did an interview with a gentleman from Greece, and he was talking about that most of the big cities, like Athens, is very accessible. Most of the bigger cities in Greece are at least fairly accessible. But then you get into the Greek Isles, and most of those you start to again have challenges. A lot of the Greek islands, like Santorini, you have fairly steep cliffs. So you have the challenges that make it difficult. South America is kind of interesting because the young lady I interviewed, she's traveled quite a bit. She said South America is not bad for transportation, but she said finding accessible bathrooms can be a challenge. We talked about Australia and New Zealand are really pretty friendly. I just had a co-creator that I watched a video of the area by the cruise terminal in Sydney, which is right by the Opera House. That whole area is very accessible. And so what I would say is that what you find is that there are, even within countries, there are accessible and inaccessible. Some places are probably going to be much better than others.
No, I understand that. So I guess the next question that follows that is, for accessibility travel, what's the best and less challenging mode of transportation? Is it going to be air? Is it going to be trains? Is it going to be cruise ships? And why?
Okay. I'm going to share my, I don't want to say this. I'm going to try to share the factual version first, and then I'll talk a little bit about preference. Air travel can be okay, provided that your flights are short. The challenge that you have is that if you are truly wheelchair bound, you no mobility, trying to get to a restroom on a plane that's in the air can be a challenge. And airplane restrooms are particularly unaccessible friendly. They're they're cramped and it's hard to move in there. So that poses a challenge. So I think that on long flights, that's one of the things that you have to take in consideration. In general, you can get really good, and I'll just give you a little bit of a tip for airports. TSA Assist is a program that you sign up for before you fly, and they will help you through getting through TSA, and they'll help you get all the way to the gate, which surprised me. We ran into this at an airport. It wasn't something I knew about, and then I did a little research on it, and I've got a short video on travel hacks for flying with scooters, and I talk about TSA Assist because that's a program is worth taking advantage of. It's free. You just want to.
Well, free is good, especially if it comes from the government. So,
yeah, this was actually one of those cases that the government was there to help us.
That's right.
Yeah. Usually they say, from the government, I'm here to help you. You have to worry. But in this case, that worked really well for us. Okay. I think that in the U.S., trains are a fairly good way to travel. I like the train. I have a video I've got to get edited where we did an Amtrak from Miami back to North Carolina. We got an accessible car. It worked really accessible. We had an accessible sleeping area, and that worked really well. It was easy for my wife. It was comfortable. If you're going shorter hauls on the train, they have places for wheelchairs. And again, they have accessible restrooms. They're good. We had an accessible shower in our roomette, which would have, was nice. we didn't take advantage of it because it was just basically a fairly short trip. I just wanted to see what the room was like. Now I did an interview with, actually it was the same lady, Ashley Olson. She and her boyfriend, who are both paraplegics, tried to go from San Francisco to Seattle with both of them in that same accommodations. And by the time you put 2 wheelchairs and 2 paraplegics in the room, that did not work so well. So that's one of the things to be aware of. It's fine for one because they have an upper bunk, but obviously for a paraplegic, an upper bunk's not an option. So those are the things to think about. But like I said, I like the train. My favorite is cruise lines. And I've done a series of videos lately about all the ways that the different cruise lines help. Now and you mentioned NCL. And I want to tell a story just real quickly about NCL.
Sure.
We have friends that are doing 2 cruises on NCL in Greece, and they did the buy one get one free airfare. So their round trip airfare for 2 people was like $8.99 actually they sail out of Venice. So they flew into Venice, but they're doing the Greek Isles. Now they're fully mobile, so they didn't need it. But NCL is probably my current favorite cruise line. I've sailed on NCL more than any other cruise line. I've done 1 Carnival and 2 Royal Caribbean. But my Royal Caribbean was so far back that the Viking Serenade was, top of the line in the fleet. And she's now in the scrapyard. But there was just for a lot of reasons we got started with NCL, and we like the ambiance and the laid back method. And I will say this about NCL, and I think this is probably true of all the cruise lines, but NCL has been just super accommodating. They've always gone out of their way. One of the things that NCL did, and they're the only one that I've heard do this, is they had able-bodied staff people use either a walker, a wheelchair, or a scooter on every ship for a week. They had one person using a walker. And the reason they did that was to find the barriers so that when the ships went in for refurb, they had the opportunity to, how do I say this? They had the opportunity to look for areas that needed to be fixed.
Right, retrofitting them. Sure.
And to show you how accommodating NCL was, we had been touring we were on the NCL Sky in January a year ago, right before things came apart. We did the Sky and the Pearl back to back. And it was really interesting because in the meeting with the officers for their Latitudes Reward Club members, I was talking to them. They were telling me about this as I was talking to the assistant hotel manager. And I said, you guys have done a really good job. He said, I've only found 1 door on the ship that's been a challenge with the wheelchair. And at the deck 13 or 14, whatever the top deck was, there was a door that went out to like a sun deck area. And it had a pretty steep ramp and it had a pretty stout spring. And, a person by themselves couldn't manage it. It was a challenge with me trying to help my wife up over and hold the door. And so I mentioned it to him. I said, that's the one thing that you guys might take a look at and think about. I was thinking, put like a hook where you can just hold the door open. He says, well, I tell you what, if you need to go out that door again, here's my card with my shipboard number. Just call me in 5 minutes. I'll be there to open the door for you.
Well, there you go. Boom.
Stop. And it was interesting because the Sky is an older NCL ship. We were on the MSC Harmonia in March last year. And I would say that the NCL wins on accessibility. The Harmonia was not bad, but a good example was on the pool deck. I was watching a lady struggle to get into the bathroom, and somebody came up and helped her real quick, but I was just watching for a second. And the bathroom door had a lip that was maybe like this high.
Oh yeah, those saddles can be tough. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, and it was just a little bit of ramp would have made it easy because she was having, even after somebody was holding the door for her, she was having to kind of jump up.
Yeah, I get it. I get the visual there. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but like I said, I think that cruise lines is probably the easiest because you're not unpacking and packing. A lot of the cruise lines now have accessible excursions. I thought it was interesting. A couple of things that I found in interviews that were interesting talking about it is the only one that I've heard has this is Holland America has some of their tenders have lifts on them, platform lifts so they can get scooters in and out, which I thought, and wheelchairs. I thought that was great. When we were on MSC in Harvest Key, no, not Harvest Key, in Grand Cayman, they had one of the tenders that came out to the ship, and I guess Royal Caribbean uses the same tendering company. So they said it depends on the ship because of height. But the tender company had a top deck on the tender where you could wheel out on, you could get my wife in a wheelchair onto the tender up on the top deck. And then when you got to the shore, they had the offload ramp. They had one that pulled up to make it was navigable. So the cruise lines are starting to pay a lot of attention to that. I interviewed Ron Pettit with Royal Caribbean, and he does the accessible. He's partially here. He has hearing challenges, and he is the ADA manager for Royal Caribbean and for Celebrity. He's going to be back on to talk about Celebrity coming up. But one of the things that he talked about is the fact that they have an accessible excursion desk. So that for people that want accessible excursions, if there's not something available, they can reach out, and he recommended that, that they work with a travel agent, and you and I had both agree because that's why we're here. It doesn't cost people anything to work with us. I know you do a great job for your clients, and I try to do a good job for my clients. But he said, have the travel agent reach out to their accessibility desk, and they can sometimes put together custom excursions in ports. They're more expensive, obviously. And they also work with, forget the name of the company, but there is a gentleman that does accessible excursions throughout most of the Caribbean, and he's got a different division that does it. And he's a paraplegic, and he got started doing what he does because he ran into problems. But they do it in Europe as well. So I would say for all of those reasons, accessibility is getting better, and the ships are a good choice. Like I said, Europe is pretty friendly. Germany is exceptionally friendly. London, I've got an interview coming up with a lady from London that's a paraplegic, and she's going to talk about things that you can get to and see and what you need to know. I did some research for a client recently, and London looks pretty friendly from a mobility perspective. The tube has stations that are and stations that aren't. You just have to do your research.
So now give us some hacks for people with, that are differently able. Like, obviously we have like 4 different types of disabilities that involve mobility. And that's going to be the cane, the walker, the scooter, and the wheelchair. And then we have the other maybe unseen people, like maybe people who have vision issues or hearing issues that, they're not mobility issues per se. Although I suppose if you have a vision issue, there could be some mobility issues that go with that. Give us some of your best hacks travel wise. And it doesn't matter what the mode or form or even location is that people should be aware of that really could help make their vacation that much better.
Okay, so I'm going to put a plug in for you again. The first thing is work with a travel agent because we have the tools and we're good at research. And if you don't work with a travel agent, the key is research. You start early. You start thinking about where do I want to go? And then you start looking into and asking questions. One of the things that I do, and this is how I give you a good example. This is how I find the guests I have on my shows. I start searching mobility or accessibility in a country or on a mode of travel. And then I research and research and research, finding some of these people. There may be 10 or 12 hours of my time finding a way to find people and then connect with them. And it's interesting that when I started my channel, I started focusing on mobility issues because that was what I was dealing with. And then actually, can I tell a quick backstory?
Go ahead.
All right. So the reason I started my channel is in doing research for a cruise that my wife and I were on. We were going on the Breakaway 3 years ago. for a Western Caribbean cruise, and we're stopping at Harvest Key, which is NCL's private island. And in my research, and because I am an inveterate researcher, I found an obscure post in, maybe it might have been on Cruise Critic, but one of the forums that talked about beach wheelchairs at Harvest Key. So I looked at NCL's site and there was no information on them. I Googled it. I searched it on Yahoo and everywhere else, on YouTube, everywhere I could think of. And there was no information anywhere about it. And I'm like, if you travel with a wheelchair, that's pretty important to be able to find. So
it's a huge thing, sure.
Yeah. So I started creating content mostly about my travel. Now I do interviews, and it's been very interesting, very educating. I have an interview coming up with Autism at Sea and one of their volunteers. And so for those who have family members that are autistic and travel, they have Autism at Sea runs a program that you can book a cruise with. It's a group cruise, and they have volunteers on board where they basically assign one-on-one if necessary, or maybe 1 to 2 or 3 of the passengers that might need assistance. And they're specially trained to deal with all of the challenges. Most of them are educators or people that work in that field. So they're all volunteers. They don't get paid for the trip. They get their expenses covered, but that is it. But they go to help so that people with autism have what they need. Now, Royal Caribbean, Princess, NCL all have, and even I'll say this too, land-based packages. I had a conversation with Beaches Resorts. They do it. I'm starting to find that even on land, a lot of the facilities where they might have childcare have specifically trained people in staff to help, so that you don't have to spend all the time with your autistic family member, but they have ways that they can go and enjoy and do that. There's going to be somebody there that understands the challenges they face. You mentioned blind and hard of hearing. Typically, typically the cruise lines with enough notice, and this is the key. Again, goes back to all of it. I'm going to circle back to where I started. Just
sure.
A second. But they have, and they can make arrangements for interpreters. Most of them can do Braille menus. Dining room staff is trained to help a blind person identify where their food is on the plate. So that way they're comfortable and somebody's there to help them in that. With blind, all the cruise lines, I think, I haven't necessarily asked all of them, but the ones I've thought to ask about, they do tours of the ship for blind passengers. So they'll take them on an orientation tour so that they can learn their way around the ship a little bit, find the things that are most important for them. So what you find is that all of the cruise lines and pretty much all of the venues now are starting to become very much aware of the importance of providing assistance. But the key, going back to the original question, my number one hack is research. You start looking for and thinking about what you need and what your challenges are. To go back to the Baltic's capital, my wife and I canceled a 10-day cruise that was deposited. I had the airfare, and Delta One class, all that was done. But as I was researching the ports, I realized that most of it my wife wasn't either going to benefit from, or I was going to be miserable trying to get her up and down the hills. So you've got to start with research. Like I said, a good travel agent is your best partner in doing that.
Well, that's true. And again, we're researching all the time. You research all the time. I research all the time. It's just part of the deal that we have. And nowadays, with all the other different protocols we have to know about, and it's a changeable feast. Every day is different. And then trust me, every place is different. It really becomes incumbent to use a travel advisor like you or me. Because the value and the fact that if you book direct, you're paying the same price. So you're paying approximately 10 to 15% more for a service you never use, which is like ridiculous. Why hand over the money to some company when you can hand over the money to us, Yeah.
Well, and like I said, it doesn't cost them anymore. And sometimes we can save them a lot of money.
That's true.
And the other thing that we do for them, like I said, is we can take the worry out of it. I think about, I was fortunate. I did not have a lot of passengers booked. But what was your life like, Scott, during the pandemic?
Well, that third week of March, St. Patrick's Day last year was a day I was drinking, but not for the right reasons. It's I calculated the amount of time I spent on hold with different travel vendors, and it turned out to be about 90 hours just to undo stuff. 90 hours. That's 2 work weeks plus over the course of March, April, and then into May of last year. But and then a couple of things weren't really finalized until July or August. And in fact, there's even one client I have who the vendor, because they were planning to go to Italy, which is still not open, and it was scheduled for early May of 2020, and then we bumped it to early May of 2021, but it's still not happening. So we're bumping it to early May of 2022. Thankfully, the client is agreeable to this, but my goodness, it's like, so yeah, I mean, I know all the hold music of all the vendors without any question, and I tell them that when they change it, when I get to a live person, I say thank you for changing your hold music, because that other hold music was dreadful. I mean, aside from Disney, all the hold music out there is dreadful. So
yeah. And so that was, like I said, that's the advantage is that your agent would have been on hold and helping you get things resolved. And a lot of times, because we're agents, we have some access to resources, because we have sales managers that we work with. They're called BDMs, business development managers. And if we don't like the answer we get from the person on the phone, we reach out to them. And
this is true. The network that we have as travel advisors is really amazing. And it's not just it's not just with the industry people as far as in the particular travel partners we deal with. It's also our colleagues out there. We do a lot of social media stuff, not only to promote our business, but also to talk and to vent and to get ideas and to get help from other people who have been in the same situation. And trust me when I say this, there's always a new situation every day that you've never stumbled upon, and it can be, and the stories I could tell would fill a book, and maybe I'll write one, but it is so true. But I think the bottom line of our conversation today, Ken, is don't be scared off if you're differently abled. If you have an issue, you can still travel. Not all of the world is completely open, and again, it's all situational. But in order to get the most out of whatever vacation, talk to your travel advisor. They'll do all the grunt work. They'll set you up so you have the most seamless experience possible. I think that's the bottom line here.
I think so too. And the one thing too I'd say is make sure that when you talk to your advisor that you let them know all of the challenges and all of the things that concern you, because there's nothing worse for us to find what we think is the perfect vacation for you, and then to find out, there's some challenges that we didn't know about that preclude that.
That's because,
because we want to find our clients the best possible vacation. And the one thing I'm convinced of is most of the places that you want to go, there are people and organizations that we can find to help you enjoy the vacation again, no matter what the challenge. So if a good example is if you have a service animal, then that's a trained service animal like a guide dog or a PTSD dog. You can take them on cruise lines. Did you know that? But there are things that you have to be aware of because every port has different requirements for bringing the dog off the ship. So you can get them on the ship, but if you need them to get around, you need to make sure that the ports that you're visiting are ports that accept service animals. So again, all of these kinds of things are things that we can help and find answers for you.
That's a good point. And again, that's what we're here for. Well, why do the work when it's your vacation? That's what I always say. And I really appreciate all the good words and the helpful suggestions. Why don't you give a plug to your YouTube channel, and then we'll get ready to wrap this up.
Okay, so my YouTube channel is Traveling with a Chair, all one word. pretty easy to find. And I have a Facebook group for those that travel with challenges, and it's traveling with a chair or other disability.
So just search that stuff up, and again, you'll find Ken and all the people he talks with. He I don't know how many videos do you have on your channel about?
A little over 200 videos now.
So there you go. You have more than enough resources to go to with Ken. You can, like I say, get in touch with me, and you can say, hey, listen, I was watched Ken's video on the Destination X, and I really want to go there. And I'll be happy to help hook you up, and I'll let Ken know too. I'll throw him I'll throw him a little Dunkin' Donuts card or something for a thank you. So it's good.
Well, I was going to say, and I don't do it for that. Like I said, it started.
Well, you do it because you have a personal vested interest.
Yeah, and I love helping people, and I love sharing information. And like I said, I love learning. And every conversation I have with somebody, I find out something I didn't know. So it's a joy.
I'll tell you one story before we wrap up, and it's a personal story from me, and that is in 2005 and 2011, I was in Beijing, China, to adopt children. And in 2005, I had no children yet because we were going to another province to get our daughter. But we went to the Forbidden City, and the Forbidden City is rather a foreboding place. In 2005, it was basically not accessible. The buildings were just not accessible for wheelchairs or scooters at all. Walkers would have a hard time too, because those saddles you talk about were 6 to even 12 inches high to go over to get into the different buildings. But what happened was between 2005 and 2011 was the Beijing Olympics. And because they had the Beijing Olympics, what they did for all those rooms that were like problematic in 2005, they had ramps to go to the saddle and ramps to go down from the saddle, so that people with those kind of devices, be it a regular wheelchair, an electric scooter, or whatever, they were actually able to go into the buildings, which was a huge victory as far as I was concerned. And I go, well, see, that's what the Olympics can do for you, And I just wanted to share that story because, again, even a place as crazy and foreboding and as busy and teeming with people and teeming with air pollution and everything else like Beijing, they were able to, at least on that basis there and also at the Summer Palace, make it so that within the 6 years, make it so that it was easier for people to actually go ahead and enjoy that. And I think that's a really important thing. And again, it's true that situationally, you can have these things so that if you are differently abled, you can go ahead and still be able to enjoy, historical, sites that, are rather stunning and wondrous for all of us.
Yeah. So here's an interesting fact. And I did an interview with a gentleman that lives in Tokyo that's a full-time wheelchair user. And he said that in general, Japan is very wheelchair friendly, but it is very scooter unfriendly. So even a power chair, you can get on the trains. And he said the subway system is amazing because they'll guide you down. They'll put a ramp across the gap on the track to get you on. But the mentality is that scooters in Japan in general had been more for use on the roads, and because of the size and because everything is so small and compact in Japan, that it is very difficult to get around Japan with a scooter, but it's very easy in a wheelchair. So for people that need it, and power chair is fine, power wheelchair. So that's one of those things that to think about is if you're going to Japan, you might want to make a connection with somebody where you can rent a power wheelchair in Japan
versus the ECV thing. Got it. Yeah. Very interesting. It's nuanced. It's really amazing. Well, Ken, I want to thank you for hopping on board with me today. It's been very enlightening, and I appreciate it because we all have clients that fall into these categories, and if they're transparent with us, we can really build and curate a wonderful travel experience. So I thank you so much for being on board. I'm going to wrap things up, let you know that that was a great segment. He has a lot of information. Go to his YouTube channel, Travel with the Chair. You'll see all the videos there. Great stuff. Just a reminder, NCL, tomorrow, extra onboard credit ends. $200 for balcony or better, $100 for interior or ocean view. and also BOGO on air. It doesn't matter where the destination is, whether you're going to join me in Rome for my Greek and Italian adventure, or if you're just want to go down to grab a cruise out of Florida or somewhere else NCL travels to, even Hawaii, BOGO is on. So you want to take advantage of that. Thank you for being on board this edition of the Walters Wandering Travel Podcast. I will be with you next time.